Welcome back to This Is Live, the Sunday talk show, here on the Arise News channel. With me, as Chair Professor Bola Akintenwa, Director General, Polytech Center for International Diplomacy and Strategic Studies. Yemi Adamolekun is also here, Executive Director in Office of. We also have Professor David Awurawo, Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and Professor Anthony Killer, Professor of Strategy and Development at the Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies, CIAPS. Now, to our next major topic of the day. Nigeria's inflation rate has surged further to 20.52% in the month of August 2022, from 19.64% recorded in the previous month, the highest single leap in 17 years. This represents the highest rate since September 2005. The recently released Consumer Price Index report by the National Bureau of Statistics showed that Nigeria's CPI rose by 20.52% year-on-year. On a month-on-month basis, the index rose by 1.77% compared to the 1.82% increase recorded in the previous month. Also, urban inflation rate stood at 20.95%, which is 3.36% higher compared to 17.59% recorded in August 2021. The rural inflation rate in August 2022 was 20.12% on a year-on-year basis, 3.69% higher compared to 16.43% recorded in August 2021. Our guest, Johnson Chukwu, is a financial and policy analyst and chief executive officer of Cowrie Asset Management Limited. He joins us now to crunch the numbers. Hi, Chief Johnson Chukwu. It's very good to have you on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show again. Well, no further, explanations. I had quoted the numbers. Can you help us relate these figures? Inflation across the psychological threshold. Everything seeming to appear tragic. Can you relate this to our circumstances as ordinary people who may not understand percentages, but who feel the raging pandemic of empty pockets and the hardship that we have to deal with on an exponential basis?
Okay, thank you, Doc, for having me. Let me put it this way. If an inflation rate of 20.52% for an average person means that if you were earning 100,000 naira last year on a monthly basis, and you are still earning the same 100,000 naira in August this year, it simply means that you can only buy, that your 100,000 naira then is now worth just about 80,000 naira today, because the value of that currency has been eroded by about 20%. So you can no longer afford to buy the same quantity of goods and services you used to buy the previous year. And that's how it affects Nigerians. And to put this in better context, we have to recognize the fact that when you talk of inflation, you mention year-on-year inflation, which is you are comparing the price level in August 2021 to the price level in August 2022. If you step back further, and you realize that most Nigerians have not enjoyed any salary increment in the past 2 years, and you consider that the August 2021 inflation rate was about 17.01%, it then means that a person who was earning the same salary in August 2020 has had his income eroded by about 37%. So because if you add the 17% that you had the year-on-year inflation as at August last year to the 20.5% this year, you are talking about something like 37.52%. or 53% in the past 2 years. So in effect, if your salary was constant over the past 2 years, you can only afford just about 60% of what you used to buy. And if you take it further to the food inflation in the month of August this year was 23.12%. And I'm emphasizing food inflation because an average Nigerian household, their household consumption is largely food. So for an average household, within the last 1 year, they can no longer afford the same quantity of food they bought last year because the price of those food items has increased by about 23.12%. If you step back further and you are saying that your salary had been constant for the past 2 years, August inflation in the month of in 2021 was 20.3%. So in effect, the average price of food items to an average household has increased by about 43% in the past 2 years. So in effect, an average household can only buy just about 55% or 56% of what they used to buy with the same level of income, if that income was spent only on food. And that's why Nigerians are hurting. That's why the average household, if you talk of inflation, they are looking at how does it affect my pocket. The fact that your pocket, if you are looking at what you consume in terms of food, has been eroded by about 43.4% in the past 2 years. So that is it. And the questions are this: what are those factors driving inflation? Food inflation in August this year was driven by critical factors such as the price of bread. Of course, you can attribute the price of bread to the price of wheat because we import wheat. We know the price of bread has gone up significantly. Then the price of other cereals. Then you talk of price of tuber, potato, yam, another tuber. And you talk of fish and oil. If you look at potato, yam, and other tuber, they are produced locally. So why is it that their prices have gone up? Because farmers have been displaced in the farming belts. You have displacement of farmers in the northeast. It started in the northeast, it got to the north central, it had now spread to the northwest, and it spread coming down south. So even the Bureau of Statistics stated that look, the food inflation, the displacement we are having among the farmers, that because farm produce can no longer be taken to the market. I understand farmers pay taxes in states like Zamfara State to go to the farm. So that's one factor. The other factor, which is core inflation. What are those factors that have driven the core inflation level in the month of August? They are the price of gas, the price of fuel, solid fuel, liquid fuel. Then you talk of the transport cost, road transport cost, and air transport cost. I understand today an economy flight ticket in Nigeria costs, if you use an official exchange, it costs about $250. Elsewhere, for 1 hour flight, elsewhere, that's not the price. You talk of $100, $80 to fly 1 hour in other countries. We're paying about $100,000, 100,000 naira to fly 1 hour flight from Lagos, Abuja, or Owerri to Abuja. The business class takes about $300 if you use official exchange rate. So that's impacting on that. Why is it so? Because we're having shortage of forex, and therefore we're having elevated price of aviation fuel. In fact, the aviation fuel supply is also really challenged. You're having high price of diesel, which is also passing on to the cost of producing goods and services in the country, because we largely run on generators to even in the factories. So these are the factors, and these are factors that ordinarily, if we manage the economy well, we shouldn't be facing.
I know you have addressed parts of my next question, but I think we need to put it more frontally. A spokesperson for the Central Bank of Nigeria said that the problem is with Nigerians, that we, the ordinary people of Nigeria, are the cause of the problem because we like imported goods. We don't believe in made in Nigeria goods, and that we have this crisis with inflation because of a demand side problem. Is it demand side, or is the issue really supply side? Considering the fact that wheat, that you referred to earlier, okay, there's been a deal between Ukraine and Russia over the movement of wheat, but still, Nigeria has not benefited. The cost of crude oil, spot price of crude oil has been going up. Nigeria is not benefiting from that boom. And yet, ordinary people get blamed because they say they have a taste for foreign goods, like the suit you are wearing, which looks like an imported suit.
How do you think this was not made in Aba? But in any case, I take it from two perspectives. Our population, according to the World Poverty Clock, said our population as of last week is about 215 million people. With that size, there is a minimum level of consumption we should expect. That consumption includes some component of foreign goods, because we don't live in isolation. We don't live on an island. I'll give an example. Today, I'm in your studio in Abuja, and you're getting the feed from Abuja. It's going through internet services. So there's no single unit of data that is produced locally here in the country. It is imported. Are we going to say that we're going to shut down and you won't be able to do this? I would have needed to have flown back to Lagos to be able to be in your studio. But that's the fact that there are some basic consumptions you must have as a country, given the size of your population. But let's take it in a more detailed context. We are not the only country in the world that is going through pressures because we import goods. But every other country who is an oil exporting country is having a different story. And I'm going to use the country that used to be the second largest producer of crude in Africa, who is now the largest producer of crude in Africa, to give an example. So that we know that what we are facing is not imposed by citizens or imposed by nature. That is because of the policy choices people in authority have taken, and not the citizens. Because the citizens cannot take decisions on how to produce crude, whether to produce enough crude, the policy that will ensure that there is selectiveness in the oil producing area so that this crude can actually come out. I'll give you an instance of Angola. In January this year, Angolan inflation was 27.66%. 27.66%. That was Angola's all-item inflation. Before the war started. The war started, Angola began to enjoy the benefits of being an oil-producing country. And today, as at the end of August, their inflation had dropped to 19.78%. Angolan Kwasa, their currency, on 31st of December, the exchange rate of Kwasa to the dollar was 562 Kwasa to the dollar. As at 16th of this month, September 16th, it had dropped to 422 Kwasa to the dollar. And that's a country that used to be the second largest producer of crude. So if we had continued to maintain our position as the largest producer of crude, today we should be talking of an appreciation of our local currency and lower inflation rate. Because virtually all the major crude producers in the country, in the world, are not going through the pressure we are going through. But unless you want to convince me that it's your duty and my duty to make sure that we have peace in Niger Delta, it's your duty and my duty to encourage oil prospecting and oil mining, then that's when I will subscribe to that statement so made by the central bank official. But otherwise, I think it's begging the situation, the issues. We need to challenge those in leadership positions so that they do the right things, because we shouldn't find ourselves in the current situation where we find ourselves. We ordinarily have those natural resources, but for one reason or the other, principally because of lack of appropriate policies, over time, there has not been proper investment in the upstream sector of the oil and gas sector. There has not been engagement of the citizens of those oil bearing assets so they can allow for crude production. And what we're witnessing are the fallout of those issues, and not necessarily because we're demanding for basic food, basic item that any other person in any other part of the world would demand for.
Okay, Chief Chukwu, what should government do? Since May, the Monetary Policy Committee has increased, interest rate, tightened monetary policy by about 250 basis points, up to 14%, which is the standard thing that has been done in other countries, except maybe in China and also maybe in Turkey. But Nigeria has tried the same formula, tighten monetary policy. It has not worked. Why has it not worked? There will be another Monetary Policy Committee meeting on September 26th. Some people are recommending that maybe the MPC should further increase, rates by 50 basis points. Do you think that will work, or what we're just dealing with is simply a failure of policy, and why?
Well, I had said this repeatedly at different fora, that the problem we have, the inflationary pressure we are facing as a country, is not driven by liquidity suffix. It's not driven by credit expansion. The model of using monetary policies to reduce or fight inflation is driven by some logic. And that logic is that you have credit expansion, consumers are accessing credit at low prices or low cost, and because the credit is cheap, people are borrowing money to demand for goods and services. So you have demand outstrips supply. But that's not what has driven inflation today in the country. I had mentioned some of those factors. The major things that Nigeria Bureau of Statistics stated in the August inflationary report is that factors driving inflation are difficulties or inability to produce food and food items and supply to the market. I had mentioned that. So the issue is insecurity in the major food producing base of the country. So the government, since we've identified the problem, the government has a duty to find a way of resolving this insecurity we have in the food producing belt. Nigeria didn't used to be like this. It wasn't like this 10 years ago, where you can't drive from Lagos, from Abuja here to Kaduna. It wasn't like that. So we must realize that something has given in. And we must find those things and address it. I used to leave Kano in the night, like 5 p.m. to go to Guzo in Zamfara State with my friends. And they will finish weddings in Guzo around 8 p.m. and drive back to Kano. But nobody will even go there in the early hours of the day. You can't go there in the middle of the day because it's not secure. So what went wrong? So that's one factor. The second factors are the issues around the core inflation. Some of them are driven by exchange rate pass-through. We've seen a consistent depreciation of the local currency. And when your currency depreciates, the pass-through effect of that depreciation will be that the price of all imported items will go up. And that's what is driving up the price of diesel, driving up the price of aviation fuel, which is also reflected in the transportation costs, road transport costs and aviation air transport costs. So for us to have a stability in our exchange rate, we must produce enough crude and export. At least that's a low-hanging fruit. In our engagement here, we mentioned the fact that the government needs to engage the locals. And the government began that process. I think they need to expand that process to make sure that everybody who has interest or whose village or community is an oil-bearing asset has some level of interest in the crude production in the country. So that's the core of what we need to do. Address the issue of foreign currency supply by improving our export volume and export earnings. And that will help us stabilize the exchange rate. If we have a stable exchange rate, inflation will come down. I use Angola as an example. Like I said to us in this our conversation, that Angolan kwasa used to be $562. As at 31st of December last year, it is $422. And that has reflected in the inflation rate in Angola from a 27.66% in January to 19.78% in August. And Nigeria should actually be in a better position because Angola used to produce about half of what we used to produce. But today, look at the figures for August. Angola produced 1,183 barrels a day. Nigeria only produced 972,000 barrels a day. Even Libya has overtaken Nigeria. Libya in the month of August produced 1,123,000 barrels a day. So we are producing 972,000 barrels a day. So that's the core of the problem. Address the issue of crude production so that you can have foreign exchange earnings. Address the issue of insecurity in the northern region so that you can produce more food.
Okay, just before we go, because we have just about 2 minutes to go, I would like to ask you, the Nigeria Labour Congress has come up with a proposal to say that maybe one way of addressing this inflation crisis that Nigeria faces is for government to address the cost of living crisis by providing a cost of living allowance. You remember COLA, the historical background to it, in the days of Labour leader number one, Michael Imodo. Economists will say wage indexation. Can Nigeria afford to do that now? Briefly.
Well, yeah, what I would say is that the government has to find a way of cushioning the impact of erosion of our consumer purchasing power on the average employees. I had given us graphic illustration that an average Nigerian employee has lost about 43% if you look at the food inflation, about 37% of their value of their income in the past 2 years if you're looking at all item inflation. So that is hurting. So the government must find a way of indexing, which is what happens elsewhere in the world, indexing some of the remuneration of workers so that this burden, the pain, will be moderated. So I can relate with the workers asking for COLA. And all that matters is the government prioritizing. We are spending about how much? 6 trillion naira on subsidy. If you take out that subsidy and you give some level of 20% income that is tied to inflation, then people will be better off than what we're currently spending some resources of the country on in terms of subsidizing a consumption of a product we don't produce locally. So it's just a matter of prioritizing the government expenditure and putting money where it will get more value for it.
Well, thank you very much, High Chief Johnson Chukwu, for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday Talk Show. We take a short break now on the program. When we return, the conversation will continue. We'll be right back. Stay with us.